What's up, internet? Today we're going to change the oil on the Busa. We've got a little over 500 miles and it's time to change the oil because my next ride I could go over the 600 mile limit and I don't want to do that. And if you're wondering why I'm changing my oil at only 500 miles, no, I do not change it every 500 miles, but if you've never gotten a new motorcycle, nowadays a lot of the new motorcycles come with break-in oil, which is essentially regular oil but with some additives to help break the engine in, and you're not supposed to run it beyond 600 miles. So if you're going to make any of your oil changes on the manufacturer's recommended service limits, the first one is probably the most important. All right, so before you start typing in your hate comments, I am using Yamaha lube. Yamaha manufactured, developed by, it actually says it. You know, I used to think that, like, I've got some Honda stuff here. I don't even know why that's here. This is from my motocross bike. But I used to think that the motorcycle manufacturers actually hired other companies like Motul, for example, to actually make their oil, and then they just put it in a branded container. But I actually looked this up. Yamaha actually designed their Yamalube themselves. That's what Google says, and Google's never wrong. So look, I don't have any affiliation to any oil manufacturers out there. I don't really care what I put in terms of who makes it. It's really about availability, cost, and to me the most important thing is your weight. This is 1040 and semi-synthetic, full synthetic. This is a full synthetic. Yeah, it's a full synthetic. And for the last two oil changes that I've done on the ZX-10R, I've been using Motul, but they didn't have, the bike shop didn't have the 1040 weight stuff. They had some 1050, which actually probably would have been fine. There is in your owner's manual, there's a temperature chart, and you can look up what weight oil for whatever riding conditions you are riding in temperature wise. And so I could have went with a 2040, 2050, I think. But I wanted to put the 1040 because that was what best fit the temperature ranges that I ride in. So I went with the Yamalube. It's a little bit cheaper, but it's still a full synthetic. The other thing that's important is on the back of these, you have meets requirements, and there's a couple of different requirements, and this one is SL, so it meets SL requirements. There's also SJ, and then in your owner's manual it'll tell you only use oil that meets these specific requirements. So those are the most important things, man. Whether you're using synthetic, semi-synthetic, full synthetic, the weight of the oil, 1040 for my particular riding conditions, and then that it meets the requirements, the SL or SJ requirements that the manufacturer specifies. The fact that it says Yamalube and we're putting it in a Busa, look, just chill with your hate comments, okay? First thing you're gonna wanna do is get the engine nice and hot so that the oil drains out nice and easy. But before we do that, we need to install these who the fuck is Chuck? Graves Motorsport swing arm spools. That way we can use a paddock stand and get the motorcycle level instead of tilted over on the side stand. So we're going to install these real quick. We'll put some red Loctite on them because I don't anticipate ever wanting to remove these. And we'll get the engine warmed up and start getting the oil drained. All right, let's do it. First step is to remove the oil filler cap. I was able to do this just with my bare hand. I didn't need any tools. However, on some filler caps, I've had to use a crescent wrench. A crescent wrench actually works really, really well because it won't damage the filler cap. Next, we need to remove the drain bolt and let the oil drain out of the engine. Suzuki likes to use these, I call them crush washers because they actually crush a little bit while you're torquing the drain plug back onto the engine. And these are really meant to be used one time only. So make sure that you get some crush washers. Might as well buy a bunch of them and just keep them in a little Ziploc or something. A Ziploc bag. My gosh, talking's hard. All right, now comes the fun part. In hindsight, it's actually not that bad, but the owner's manual and the service manual do not do a good job of explaining how to take off the lower right side fairing so that you can gain access to the oil filter. There are a couple of body pins on the front, and then there is one screw on the back by the foot peg. And then there's a hidden screw, somewhat hidden screw, that I really didn't see in the service manual, owner's manual. We eventually, after, I don't know, some time of struggling with trying to figure out what was holding the fairing onto the motorcycle, we did eventually find the screw, loosen the screw, and then it wasn't too bad after that. So, you know, for the first time, just know that you've got an additional screw near the front, but on the inside of the fairing, and you won't be able to gain access to it until you remove those body pins. And then you've got the one screw that's very visible on the outside, back by the foot peg. And once we found that magical inside screw, it came off pretty easy after that. And so now that the lower right fairing is off the motorcycle, you've got clear and easy access to the oil filter. And unfortunately, the oil filter wrench I have for the ZX10 is just a hair too small, which I guess it makes sense that the larger 1340cc Suzuki Hayabusa engine has a slightly larger filter. It's just a bummer because it makes it a lot easier to both take off and put on. One thing to note is when you put on a new oil filter, make sure that you put just a dab of oil around the rubber seal, and then you don't really need to torque these down a whole lot. Just kind of snug them up, and depending on how strong or small or big your hands are, you can actually do these by hand. Once you've got the drain plug with the new crush washer bolted back into the engine and you've got your new oil filter on, it's time to refill the engine with some new oil. Be sure to keep an eye on the sight window. The manual will tell you how many quarts of oil you need. And just make sure that you keep the level between those two hash marks on the sight window. And then once you've got the right oil level, go ahead and run the engine again and then let it sit for a few minutes and then check your sight window again.
Okay, that was definitely higher level of effort than the ZX10. You don't have to remove anything on the ZX10. The filter, the drain plug, everything is easy access. And when you take the filter off, it doesn't spill onto the headers or anything. With the Suzuki, you do have to take this lower side fairing off to gain access to the filter. And when you remove the filter, it's pretty impossible to not get just a little bit of oil, at least on the header. So you can wipe those down, but you might get a little bit of smoke when you fire the engine up and the headers get hot, and it's going to try and burn off whatever oil spilled on there. Sadly, it's a little bit larger oil filter than the ZX10, so my oil filter wrench doesn't fit, so we had to improvise. Just like with any oil change, I followed the owner's manual exactly, put in 3.6 quarts, which is what it called for. But with any oil change, you want to fire up the engine, let the pump circulate oil through the entire engine and into the filter. This filter mounts sideways, so you don't really have a lot of leeway in putting any kind of oil inside the filter or pre-oiling the filter or anything like that. When you have the filters that just drop straight down, you can actually fill those up before you put them back onto the engine. But we don't have that here, so you got to fire it up, let the oil circulate through the system, and then let it sit for a minute, recheck your sight window. I ended up putting almost 4.25 quarts, US quarts into it to get the sight window where it needs to be. Anyway, I'm going to put this back on It was a little bit of a pain to get off. There are a bunch of little tabs all around. There's a screw here that the owner's manual didn't mention removing, and then there's a couple of body pins that go on, and one here, and then there's one up here on the center cowling. But anyway, that's that, man. I'm done. I'm gonna put this back on and call it a day. So keep the rubber side down. We'll see you guys in the next video.